welcome back to Spotlights, the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. I'm your host, Sam Mickey, and this week is the second part of a two-part interview with Susannah Crockford, author of the new book, Ripples of the Universe, Spirituality in Sedona, Arizona. Now, in last week's episode, we got into some of the basic details of what this book is about, and this week, we're going to talk a little bit more about how the topics and themes and figures of this book have really become a prominent part of the scene of U.S. politics this year and in recent years. So I'll let Susannah take it away from there. So yeah, let's get into it. I guess if you could say really quickly for folks who might not know, what's QAnon? I know that's, that's kind of...
I hate it.
Yeah.
No, I just hate describing it because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
So QAnon is this movement based around a figure who exists only on the internet, essentially, called Q, who writes these things called drops. Drops are messages posted on image boards, first 4chan, then 8chan, then 8kun. And if you're interested in the history of things like how that all emerged, I would recommend Into the Storm. Q Into the Storm. It's a documentary on HBO by Cullen Hoback. And he's kind of like interviewed all the various kind of figures behind the image boards and behind the kind of early drops. And that's a great kind of explainer in a short documentary. It's actually quite a long documentary. It's like 6 hours.
Oh, wow.
But basically, these drops exist on these image boards, and they got interpreted in various ways by other users called anons. So that's why it's Q. So Q is the figure doing the drops. Anons are the people who interact and interpret Q's drops. So it's QAnon, the two together. And so the first layer is called bakers, and they bake the drops and make interpretations about what they may be. And then you've just got the anons and the people who are going to talk about it and spread it. And then it spreads over from the image boards to things like YouTube. And you've got these various influencers with large followings across platforms, taking the things that are on these image boards, these messages from Q, and turning them into various kind of prophecies. The central one is that there are going to be a series of arrests. Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, basically all the Democrats. They're all going to get arrested because they are satanic pedophiles and they are involved in an international child trafficking scheme. They not only traffic children, they do horrific things to children. So this renders the Democrats and the political enemies of Donald Trump as literally evil. And the Q drops are kind of very cryptic. And if you go to the drops, it's kind of hard to see why they caught on. So these ideas a lot of the ideas were already there. And they were really drawing together different conspiracy theories, such as Pizzagate, right? So Pizzagate is one from the email leaks of Hillary Clinton and John Podesta, especially through WikiLeaks. There's a lot of references to pizza because they like eating pizza. Like that's literally it. That's the substance of these things in the emails. But they got interpreted online as being coded references to different children that they were going to order. And there's like the Satanic Panic all the way back from like the 80s and 90s. But if you read current QAnon material, they make references to these former cases. So the Satanic Panic was this idea that kind of various different childcare providers basically were murdering children in satanic rituals. So all this gets drawn in as well. Then there's the reptilians, which is like the bad aliens who are trying to keep us in the third dimension. If you go on to certain sides of QAnon, the bad aliens are the ones behind the New World Order, and the New World Order is what's behind the child trafficking ring. So all these things kind of get connected. And a lot of these theories have been around for decades, if not longer. So QAnon just kind of repackaged it and put Donald Trump as the messianic figure. And it's really been able to fuse various different kind of religious trends in America. One is Christian nationalism, this idea that America is a Christian country. It was founded by God for the use of white English-speaking Protestants. The people who support it won't add that, but at the end, that they are white English-speaking Protestants. They'll say real Americans.
Right.
What is a real American, right? So Christian nationalism has fused incredibly strongly with QAnon because it's this idea that the enemies of America are the enemies of Donald Trump the cabal is kind of identified with the enemies of America from a Christian nationalist perspective. And a lot of the people that you saw invading the Capitol on the 6th of January were carrying symbols and iconography connected to Christian nationalism. The other group that has really kind of connected with QAnon is New Age spirituality, because in New Age spirituality, they already had this idea of reptilians and the New World Order that's controlling the world behind the scenes and is polluting the air and the water and the land, right? Yep. So there was already this idea of this nefarious evil, and QAnon and just like they just merged together really easily because it was all the same kind of ideas that were part of their mythology. This is my son, Alexander. Like a bike helmet.
That was very cute. That's good timing. Talking about conspiracies, this little helmet emerges, and then the fact that Christian nationalism would intersect with New Age spirituality was just so weird to me. And again, I guess, you know, because I'm in California now, where it's like, well, our New Age spirituality wouldn't necessarily hit those kind of nationalistic tones so quickly. But obviously, the kind of stuff in Sedona, that's a different story. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that connection. Like, how are the Christian nationalists okay, like interacting with New Age people? Are they kind of at odds with each other? Or they're like, well, we have the same goal, so you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, kind of thing.
Right. To what extent do Christian nationalists accept people involved in New Age spirituality as patriots, right?
Right, exactly.
And there's this really interesting interaction on the videos of the Capitol siege where Jake Angeli, aka Q Shaman, who's like a great representation of like QAnon New Age spirituality, right? That's what he calls himself, a shaman. He calls himself a starseed. Like he wrote a book, and it's basically all conspiracies you get to the end. And he says, but the way to fix this is to follow your spiritual path. Like I just like spent 100 pages describing an evil pedophile ring. Go be a shaman. Yeah, it's a real read. So he comes into the Senate chamber and someone's doing a prayer or something, and he's like, yeah, right on, brother, or something. And you can tell that, like, you can see the other people being like, what? You're with us? What? And he does this kind of like call. He like makes this like really loud noise that he makes at protest generally. That's like his shaman's call to like, you know, break through basically. And they're all a bit like, what are you doing? Shut up. And then he switches to a prayer and they're like, oh yeah, okay, you're one of us. So in having read Jake Angeli's book, I know that he was in fact raised in like a Bush voting household in kind of a conservative Christianity context. So he's obviously knows how to essentially code switch Christianity when he needs to be accepted. And I think that it's definitely like an uneasy kind of alliance. Like, I think that Christian nationalists will accept people like Jake Angeli who invest in New Age spirituality as long as they are kind of very overtly Q promoting, which, like, you know, Jake Angeli walks around literally with Q sent me flags. And that they can cease to do their shamanic calls for a moment when, you know, the Christians are around. So it's not like they accept what he's doing. And I think that there's a lot of within the Q movement, like especially now that Joe Biden, so in the Q movement, the election wasn't meant to happen the way it did, right? Trump was meant to be reelected. So they think the election is fake. But now there's like a lot of splintering. You know, some people are saying, well, obviously Q wasn't right because Biden's president now. Like one of Q's big predictions was that Donald Trump's going to be president again. Because Q's meant to be this military insider, right? He's meant to have secret inside knowledge. But, you know, Biden's president, what are you going to do? You've got to accept that reality or not. So there's all this splitting. And some of the kind of more Christian nationalist elements are definitely kind of turning against some of the more kind of alien promoting elements and kind of saying that they're like, it's so funny. The people who believe in aliens are really making us who want to murder everyone who's not a Christian look bad. That's essentially what it is. You're like, oh,
that's very funny.
Yeah. But yeah, so they think they make them look bad, that they make them look ridiculous because of course all that stuff about Hillary Clinton and
that's really funny. Yeah, the nationalism's okay. The racism and things like that. They're like, well, that's fine. The aliens.
That's where we draw the line. Although, interestingly enough, Ron Watkins, who a lot of people say is the person behind Q, because he was like the administrator of 8chan and 8kun, he's recently launched a new site called Alien Leaks for WikiLeaks, but about aliens. So he's clearly like diverting towards the kind of aliens and disclosure side.
How interesting.
Really interesting. Yeah.
Well, and then with all the UFO talk recently, right? That it seems like that would help people be like, oh no, I'm gonna go for the alien side of things.
Yeah, aliens is coming back in because the US government's admitted that they were actually studying UFOs all along, which was kind of obvious, but it's kind of one of those things where they made such a like thing of like, oh no, we're not studying it. Like there's nothing behind the screen. But what is an unidentified flying object, right? It's just an object in the sky that they don't know what it is.
Right.
So of course the US military is studying these things, right?
Yeah.
It could just be some form of technology from another country that they don't know about yet.
Right.
So, but there are some weird things that are like kind of cataloged in some of the more recent UFO stuff.
Yeah, right. Enough for people to be like, it could be aliens.
Yeah, my interest in the aliens is just that it's so clearly like an American mythology now.
Yep.
That, like there's it's like this kind of explanation of a vast cosmological order and like why things are happening, and it's so intertwined with this kind of huge military that you have here.
Mm-hmm.
You're from the Southwest, right? And a lot of alien stories and UFO reports are from the Southwest. And then if you think about what is the Southwest, right? Nevada is basically a giant underground military base.
Right.
Once you get north of Vegas, it's just shady like bases for hundreds of miles. And then if you like, Tucson's got a giant air base right by it,
right.
like the biggest like Air Force base, I think specifically, and they have this giant like Air Force museum there, and there's just like fields and fields of planes. And then you've got things like the nuclear testing sites in New Mexico, so this like this corridor. And so of course you get alien sightings of this corridor of military activity. It's like, of course. The skies in the Southwest are kind of like red and blue and crazy at sunset as well.
That's true, yeah.
So if you see like a weird object when the sky is already like a very kind of bright red, you're like, oh, that's weird.
Well, yeah, and I'm also thinking that if people are on drugs, that would kind of facilitate some of those experiences too.
This explanation of UFO sightings was actually given to me at the Burning Man Festival by someone who lived in Truckee, Nevada. Right? It was like, look, kids just come out here to the desert, they get really high, and they look at these crazy clouds and these crazy colored skies, and they see aliens. And I'm like, I think you might be right.
Well, and I would think that the kind of New Age interpretation of that is they're like, no, by like taking a psychedelic drug, I'm able to elevate my vibration. So I'm not just like hallucinating. I'm tuning into something that other people aren't recognizing as real. But for me, it's real.
You're gaining access to other kind of dimensions of reality, right? That's exactly it. But also some of them, like the New Age spirituality people, they go even further. They will say they are aliens from other dimensions. So this is like a whole chapter in the book. The one about aliens is about people who say that they are starseeds. Like this is what Jake Angeli.
Oh, right, starseed.
Starseed is a person who has an alien consciousness in a human body, and there are different types. They also call themselves walk-ins, and there are braided walk-ins who have been aware of their alien consciousness since birth, and then there are ones who will wake up to it later. So this kind of whole motif of waking up applied in alien discourse already before the whole kind of, and it was in conspiracy discourse, because what waking up means in conspiracy discourse is like waking up to the truth of the New World Order and everything they're doing. And in alien discourse, it means waking up to the truth that aliens are real and the government knows about them and the government likes about them. So you see how these things can connect together, both in terms of like disbelieving the government, but kind of becoming aware of other dimensions of reality, other planes of existence almost. Yeah. And this is a very powerful thing, and obviously it's an extremely strong religious motif as well, and it comes from this history of awakening in American religion. You've had these kind of waves of revivalism called the First Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening. Now QAnon also calls itself the Great Awakening. Like in New Age spirituality, they also call it an awakening when you realize kind of the truth of spirituality, or maybe that you are in fact an alien. one of my interlocutors that I write about in the book called it his Kundalini Awakening. So Kundalini is a symbol taken from Hinduism, and it's kind of the Theosophical Society used it a lot, so it was there in Western esotericism. And it's like this idea of the two snakes going up, right? And he imagined the two snakes going up his chakras from the base of his spine up to the crown above his head, and that process was how he awakened, and then realized that his true self, as he called it, was from the Pleiades, which is a star system many light years away, that that you can kind of see through observatories, so we know it's there, but no one actually knows what's on the Pleiades, right? I think it's thought to be like a system of gas stars, though. But I don't know why the Pleiades in particular. But people also say they're from Arcturus. Sirius, the star Sirius, is another common one. Yeah, and so they
interesting options for homes. They're like, no, I'm pretty sure from there. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's always the ones with like names and mythological connections to like.
Oh.
They don't just pick out like the ones that astronomers have found, but they've named like, I don't know, R51C2. Right. Right. Oh, hello, Alexander. Hi. Hello. Can you go watch whatever very loud cartoon you're watching right now? No. Okay.
Well, that's good. This isn't an interruption at all, really.
Sorry.
Hi.
You want to say hi? No.
Oh, I was very shy when I was 5.
Yeah. No, so he'll like run in, but he doesn't want to engage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can back.
Well, so bring this back to Q Shaman, because he seems like a figure where all this stuff is intersecting. You have the Christian nationalism, you have the kind of conspiracy theories about the government, you have the idea that you're an alien, and I'm also interested in the dietary restrictions that you mentioned, because that was also the case.
Jake Angeli, didn't they? Because he asked for organic food in prison. But this is actually a really important thing in New Age spirituality. Food is, they think you don't need modern medicine, right? You just need the right diet. Right. Food is everything. It literally creates your kind of corporeal 3D form as it exists on this dimension. And if you are creating it through kind of low vibration foods, you will always be stuck in a low vibration, and you will experience this as sickness. Whether that's kind of chronic illnesses or like kind of vague gastroenteritis illnesses, which is kind of a lot of what people say gets fixed by not eating gluten. But some people have very serious terminal illnesses. I met people who had various forms of cancer who swore to me that they cured that cancer through an alkaline diet. Now, this is eating foods with an alkaline pH. So that's one of the kind of levels of like, I describe it as a hierarchy. And the higher up you are in the dietary hierarchy, the higher your vibration is spiritually. So these are linked. So mind, body, soul, these are all very much linked in New Age spirituality. And if you eat a high vibration diet, which is as furthest away from human intervention as possible, is the way I describe it. So, the highest vibration foods are wild. They're still living, like things like sprouts or berries. So that's why kombucha is so popular. Kombucha is a fermented food. It's got yeast in. They call that the mother, the SCOBY that you ferment things in. So it's meant to be a source of life, right? So that's a very high vibration for a food. Even though all kombucha is this fermented tea, right? It's just sugar and tea and the SCOBY, and various flavorings. But it's got a high vibration because it's living, right? And so the lowest vibration foods is meat, obviously, is very bad. You should at least be a vegetarian, I think. But the people who aren't vegetarians actually will be something like paleo or keto. So they'll eat like organic grass-fed beef. So organic is good because it doesn't have like the pesticides. So that's an artifice of human alteration. Chemicals are very negatively valenced here. So even though, okay, if you're going to take like the perspective of a chemist, right? It's all chemicals, right? The oxygen you breathe is chemicals, but chemicals that are placed there by human processes are seen as bad for your food. So any processed food is bad. And you know what I mean by processed food, right? Canned cheese and all that awful stuff that Americans do to food. You know, so I think part of this is a response to this, what they call the standard American diet, right? Which is like high fat, high sugar, lots of caffeine, lots of processed foods, like anything with high fructose corn syrup, for example. They're very, very negative about the high fructose corn syrup foods, which is not necessarily a bad position, right? Like, I don't think it's problematic that Jake Angeli wants organic food in prison. I think it's problematic that in America, prisoners are fed food that is actually not fit for human consumption.
Yeah.
So I think like looking at Jake Angeli and criticizing him for his diet choices is kind of missing the point of the system he's trapped in, right?
Yeah.
You can say that's his own fault, and certainly no one made him.
And especially that he was looking for like religious protection to do it, right? He's like, no, but I deserve this because it's my religion and religious freedom. And then they had to look, and they're like, I'm not sure what the official shaman diet is. That doesn't seem.
There really isn't one. Yeah. You know, and Evenki shamans, I think, eat lots of reindeer, but also I don't think their reindeers are like sprayed with pesticides. But on the other hand, they live in Siberia, which has a very high rate of industrial pollution because there's a huge amount of extractive industries out there. Yeah. So anyway, the complexities are many.
Yeah, that's why I like this so much. It's really just such a great example of the kind of research that religious studies is best at, right? Is finding something and seeing how it really connects to politics and economics and different movements and geographies, and so it's a great story to read. Really, I mean, it's not that different than the conspiracy theories that you're studying. It's like, oh, all these connections, it all makes sense now. So I wonder, when you're studying all this, it can be dangerous ethnographically. You get too close, then you get sucked into it. Oh, yeah. So I wonder what are the conspiracy theories that you felt most drawn to, that you're like, oh, that one is okay.
1 second, I'm just going to close the door.
Oh, sure.
Very loud Scooby-Doo going on in the background. Yeah, so I probably, like many people, felt the most like drawn in by the health conspiracies, like specifically the ones around cancer. So I've lost relatives to cancer, and before I went to the field, I had like an abnormal cell growth, which was resolved, and it never became cancerous, but it was enough to make me very concerned, like about the birth control pills I was on, for example, and things like that. So then when I got to the field, and there was people saying, well, you know that cancer is an industry now, and that they could cure it, but they don't want to because they're making money out of it. So they here is like big pharma, right? What they call big pharma, the pharmaceutical companies, but also the insurance industry here in America, and the kind of the healthcare system, which is entirely monetized. Now, I'd never really thought about it in that way because I come from Britain, where we have universal healthcare. But even in Britain now, these ideas are becoming much more popular. The idea that your healthcare industry is not really serving you as a person with kind of health requirements or health problems, or however you want to frame them, but it is in fact serving the perpetuation and survival of that industry, which requires you to be sick. So they're monetizing your sickness, and they're prescribing drugs which don't really work. And there are certain parts of the healthcare industry which are kind of picked on as like, things like the overprescription of antibiotics, the overprescription of antidepressants, and especially like drugs like Ritalin. Like, a lot of my interlocutors will have grown up and have been like told that, that essentially that their personality was wrong, and that they needed to take pills to alter themselves. Which is a very common experience, unfortunately, for young people growing up in America. So then when you then kind of encounter these ideas of big pharma kind of making you sick so they can sell you the cure, like a total bad faith system, that's what that would be. So I can see why they understand them, because there's a real experience of just existing in America where you really feel like your health is your problem, right? You have to like have the right diet. You have to get out there and do exercise. Like, I'm a lazy European. We get up and drink coffee and smoke cigarettes. And like you just like the fact that Americans get up and jog, I'm just like, oh god. But I understand why, because your health is really individualized. You are responsible for your good health. And bad health can be extremely expensive, like life cripplingly expensive in terms of debt. So of course you want to try and avoid that as much as possible. So I think that these ideas about kind of a malicious entity behind the way that the healthcare system runs, that was something I could really identify with and empathize with. I never went so the idea that diet can cure cancer, you have to be very careful about the claims you make about that, because
Right.
you're not allowed to go out and represent yourself as a medical professional where you're not allowed to be, and you're not allowed to try and sell people cures that are not going to help them when they have a terminal illness, because that's incredibly exploitative.
Yeah.
Um, so often, the people I spoke to who did these kind of things were the people who had cancer, right? And they talked about their experience. The people I knew who, for example, were like selling like kombucha and elixirs and like almost and all these things, which people might say they have properties to help cure or like help fight cancer, right? But their people selling them had to be very careful in that they would not make these claims. So you do need to be, they would need to be careful there as well. Like, and I find it really hard not to be against things like the pharmaceutical industry, right? Like, I also think they are bad, and I think a lot of their practices are corrupt and unethical. But I don't think that that necessarily means that cancer's being perpetuated, that I'm being kept sick in order to perpetuate their profits. Even though, again, from a certain perspective, that is what's happening. They are profiting off illness.
Yeah. Just maybe without anybody intentionally like orchestrating that kind of, it's like it's like a side effect of a bad system, and there's some maybe some bad faith actors in the mix, but there's also just people who are like, I'm trying to be a good doctor and heal people, and then all that together makes a system that's just terrible. But yeah, it's not that there's actually somebody pulling the strings. I guess that's the thing with conspiracy theories. It always seems like it's actually the simpler way to look at things. Like, I wish it would all make sense if there was just one person at the top who was like, no, if we do this and this, then I'll control everybody.
Right?
And
You
that's
didn't
that's
take out that person and you could fix the problem.
yeah.
But in fact, these are systemic problems. And there's this kind of inability to see this kind of the level of the social, if you will, like the kind of the action of institutions and the perpetuation of kind of systemic problems like racism and sexism, but also things like kind of healthcare inequalities. Like the problem I kept coming across when I was studying conspiracy theories is I read things like fluoridation, right? I'm like, oh, that's stupid, right? Fluoridation is fine for your teeth. The World Health Organization says so. And I would always come back to these same problems. Like, one, I clearly believe in institutions, right? And if I didn't have that belief in things like the World Health Organization, why would I believe that fluoride is good for my teeth? I haven't gone out there and studied it. I don't know that in a kind of empirical, direct way. I'm trusting what other people have said because I trust scientists, because I feel like I know them in my work, and I feel like I know that most of them are working in good faith. And the second problem I've come across is that actually these problems do exist. They're just being kind of misdiagnosed, and the attribution of agency is being overextended. Right? There are problems with the water. Like Flint, Michigan hasn't had clean water for decades. Right?
Yeah.
These are real problems. But it's not that someone's kind of going along putting the secret toxin into the water on purpose to control us. In fact, it's much worse. Someone just left lead pipes decaying there, poisoning the water because it was too expensive to fix it, and they didn't care enough to do so.
Yeah, right. It's more like apathy and kind of ignorance. Like, what is it in logic? They call it Hanlon's razor. That a lot of times what we attribute to malice is actually just stupidity. And it's like, no, it's a lot of stupid people just making shortcuts and not being responsible, and not trying to control the world or anything. And it's precisely worse. Like, no, they're just like lazy.
Yeah, and also there are some populations which are seen as worth less on the level of bureaucracy and governmental practice, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason why it's Flint, Michigan's pipes that don't get fixed, but say, I don't know, your next town over that's predominantly white that has a high tax base, their pipes did get fixed, right? And these are kind of the kind of historical inequities that are baked into the system here. And the outcomes are profoundly unfair. And it's easy then to say, well, I think someone's doing this on purpose. Even if they're actually perpetuating a corrupt and abusive system not on purpose.
Right.
And in a way, I find it more comforting to believe that like humans have agency and they're doing this on purpose. I think people find that more comforting.
Yeah.
Because when I sit there and explain, no, this is systemic, actually, blah, 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 you come to this very depressing realization. It's very bleak.
That's true. You're like, oh no, it's
Like,
so
what do
much
I
worse.
do? Oh my God.
Yeah, that's so much more disempowering. So like,
And it's
otherwise, you could just have that
empowering.
fantasy of taking out the person on top. And
Yeah, it is empowering to believe in conspiracy theories. So many people who get involved in QAnon do so because they're making connections, they're finding the clues, they're finding out the secret, and then they're a digital soldier fighting against the enemy that they have identified, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a whole kind of adventure story for them, where they suddenly have power in the world to stop great injustices, right? Human trafficking exists and it's a huge problem. It's just that people involved in QAnon are not doing anything to help that, but they believe they are. And it's that belief that makes them so engaged and committed to this verifiably false worldview.
Yeah, that's interesting. The conspiracy theories and the New Age spirituality both seem to have that overall feeling of empowerment.
Yeah.
That kind of like if I can just think the right way, have the positive thoughts, and I can ascend and I can awaken. And so it's all this like, and I can understand everything that's going on politically in the whole world order. And so some of it just seems like this kind of desperate attempt to find power during a very disempowering time in our history.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's does your book end with like a positive note, but things are gonna get better?
Sorry. I'm sorry. I feel like this is one of the most common critiques of my work. Like climate change, and I was describing like the structure of the book I'm going to write about that. Someone said at the end, but don't you want to end with hope? I was like, yeah, no, sorry, that's not what I do. No, it doesn't end on an empowering or hopeful note. The conclusion is very much like noting the places of conjunction between spirituality and these more kind of more like survivalism, like the idea of going off onto the land away from the state, which is obviously run by the Dark Cabal. So you find your own land and you start your own commune. And it kind of talks about that impulse, this kind of almost like individualistic, like yet anti-statist movement, which leads very easily into a form of political libertarianism, which especially with the health concerns and the opposition to public health measures in the last year, which are found throughout what you might call the wellness industry and community, which overlaps very much with New Age spirituality, which apparently also overlaps with libertarianism and this idea that you should be able to take whatever remedies you think are best for yourself, and reject any ones that you don't feel comfortable with, because unfortunately this now means vaccinations. And so this is really where the collision of worldviews has ended. Like I think we mentioned earlier, it kind of started in this place where it can be essentially harmless. You know, you just find your own, you just drink your bottled water, you find your own water source because you don't want the fluoridated water.
Right.
When what's being recommended is a public health measure, which if you don't follow, you can actually make others sick, far sicker than you may get yourself. So COVID is almost like a perfect storm for the weaknesses and deficiencies in these various kind of interlocking systems of like libertarianism, or what they call health freedom now, and then New Age spirituality and wellness. You can't just be personally responsible for your health, because you live in a society and your health actually impacts other people's health. And COVID has really brought that to the fore, you know, with the differential experiences of the disease itself, where some people get so sick and die and other people just get like a mild flu-like illness or no symptoms at all, you know, combined with the fact that it's, you know, it's airborne, so you know that you have to cover your mouth, you have to stay away from other people. Well, that's really bad if you're kind of coming from this health system of my personal health, my personal responsibility.
And if I'm positive enough and I'm, you know, if I'm exercising and doing the right diet, then that's all I have to do.
High to get COVID. Like I've heard this so many times over the last year. I don't need to worry about COVID. I'm a healer. I'm a naturopath. I'm a vegan. My immune system is so high. I'm not going to suffer from COVID. It's like, well, you may not do, but you may pass it on to someone who does.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, right? This lack of concern for a wider community than the self.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, this is one of the structural weaknesses in America, that like so many structural weaknesses have been laid bare, but one is really this individualism, especially as it relates to health
Yeah.
choices.
Well, I mean, in a way, I think that is hopeful to be able to see so clearly how bad things are. Because if you can see it, then maybe we can spot it. Because obviously, whatever happened with COVID, climate change is a similar issue of people don't care about the common good, the public good. They're just going to act selfishly. And then we're going to see all these fractures of how inequality and race and things like that get sucked into it. So knowing that is what we need to watch out for, I think, is at least a kind of empowerment in itself, really. Because yeah, hope is oversold. There's too many books that are always being like, "Don't worry, there's hope." Like, maybe we don't need hope as much as we need to know exactly how bad things are, so maybe we can do something.
Right? So it's actually like with climate change, it's actually even worse, because you really have the certain sections of the population are impacted worse than others, and not just in terms of where you live, but in who you are and how much the state already provides for you. So if you are already not receiving infrastructure and basic services from the state, you are already being more negatively impacted by climate change. For example, Phoenix neighborhoods show this very easily. The lower income neighborhoods are hotter because there's less shade, because of the way the houses are built, because of the way the streets are built, because of the amount of traffic, and just like all of these things are negatively impacting communities already, and climate change is therefore impacting them more severely.
Yeah.
And you've got these people who are in there much nicer, better placed, not on the floodplain, I don't know, a bit higher up. I live in Flagstaff, we're up on a mountain, we can be like, Phoenix suffers record heat waves, but all the people from Phoenix are then going to be moving up the mountain, right? So you've then got the migration impacts, and moreover you've also got the fact that there are some groups in society who are benefiting from fossil fuel capitalism a lot, and they are spreading disinformation, and this attempt to politically spread disinformation is feeding this kind of generalized discontent and distrust of institutions, and these beliefs of I'm going to make sure I'm fine, right? This individualism that we were just speaking about. So of course they're going to believe these lies that are being spread, which support the system that they're already living in and benefiting from. You can't trust the people who are benefiting the most from a system to break that system down. And unfortunately, with fossil fuel capitalism, this means the extractive industries want to keep things the way they are. And so therefore you will see more money behind this kind of circulation, this kind of online ecosystem of disinformation and lies, and more people taking them on because they already support the things they already believe about them as an all-powerful individual who can, like, with their immune system or with their resources, survive everything. And then you get the resources being shrunk, and the amount of people who are allowed to access those resources, that is getting shrunk as well. Yeah. So we're in an incredibly dangerous situation here. And in America, there's a particular thing. There are certain segments of the population who've been dismissed as fringe for a long time, who want to push America towards a civil war.
Right.
You cannot ignore the side of QAnon and the side of Christian nationalism, and even the side of something New Age spirituality, where they want to separate from the people that they now see as evil, right? Not being a patriot is now seen as a sign of being demonic, of being evil, of being a low vibration. And these elements aren't fringe anymore. They're literally storming the Capitol. Yeah. We're in an incredibly dangerous place. And back when I started my research in 2012, I remember people saying, I think this country's headed to civil war. And I was like, that's nonsense. I'm like, no, the way you get a civil war is people keep talking about a civil war, and that some of those people want it and some of those people are pushing towards it. It's like when someone is pushing you towards a fight, you can only turn away for so long before you have to fight back.
Yeah.
That's true. Where we are now. And that's what I've realized, that a lot more, especially in terms of the media, are talking about this now. And that's good. Because the more we kind of dismiss this, it's just fringe elements. Now we've got Biden, everything's going to go back to normal. No, it's not. These things are still happening. Climate change is still happening, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be more and more crises. we know this.
Yeah.
So we have to start responding to that reality, not this kind of fairy tale that we want to live in where everything's going to be okay.
Right. If there's anything we've learned from New Age spirituality, be careful about the fairy tales where you think, oh, name it and claim it, positive thinking will make it happen. Like, no, there's real problems.
You need any greater argument against positive thinking. Donald Trump went to the church run by Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. If you think positively all the time about yourself and your actions, then you end up with Donald Trump. The man can never be wrong. And he's so never wrong that even when an election votes him out, he says that that election was false.
Yeah, no, that's really remarkable. Um, I could really just talk to you forever. I like all these topics so much, and you just really have your finger on the pulse of American religion, which I really appreciate. You know, since I guess because you kind of see us as an outsider a little bit, you might be able to understand. You're like, oh, you Americans,
Yeah,
but
but I'm like the insider outsider, right?
yeah,
Because I'm British, so I speak English and I'm white, and I'm like, I'm like you, but I'm not like you. But I am acceptable to be allowed in. And so this
right.
kind of gives me this strange position of being like both implicated, but also somehow an outsider. Um,
Yeah, I appreciate that. Any comment I ever hear from you where you're talking about America, I'm like, wow, yeah, that's it. That's it exactly. It's exactly what we do. Things that I know, even, I remember hearing you once, like on social media, talking about the way Americans drive. And like,
oh my
why are
God.
we all trying to kill each other with our cars? Nobody goes the speed limit.
I like feel this is one of my daily rants. Like, why is everyone trying to kill me when
It's
I drive?
terrible. It's terrible. I don't understand it. And how yellow means go faster. If
Yes.
there's yellow light, floor it. Like, no, it's caution, right?
Slow down. Prepare to stop.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just it's ridiculous. So I'm really grateful for your perspective, holding up a mirror to American religion and culture, and just seeing how bad things are. Uh, so I
Like
don't know.
the place of love, right? I'm saying how bad things are because I think they can be better and I want them to be better.
That's a nice way to, yeah, not just doom and gloom pessimism here, folks. Yeah. Well, I can't imagine a high note to end on.
Yay! I finally got I know.
So, yeah, Susannah Crockford, thanks so much for being on the program. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll be back next week with more interesting discussions for you. So, in the meantime, take care and be well.